When someone vanishes without a trace, we assume the worst. We search, we mourn, and eventually, we give up. But what happens when a ghost walks back through the front door? Today, we're covering 10 of the most shocking and disturbing cases of people who disappeared, only to reappear years later. If you love deep dives into baffling mysteries, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and give hype points. Now, let's get into it. Imagine a quiet Sunday evening in a small Romanian village. The kind of evening where the only sounds are dogs barking somewhere down the lane and a tractor coughing to a stop in the field next door. And then, out of nowhere, a car you've never seen before pulls up to your front gate. It stops. A door opens. An old man, older than time itself it seems, is helped out of the back seat, set down on the dirt by your fence, and before anyone can even call out a hello, the car floors it and vanishes down the road. No license plate, no driver's face, nothing. You walk to the gate to see who this lost old stranger is, and then you stop. You go pale, because the lost old stranger is your father-in-law, who has been dead, as far as you knew, for 30 years. This is the story of Vasile Gorgos, and honestly, once you understand what makes this case so disturbing, you may never look at a missing persons report the same way again. Let's set the scene. It is the summer of 1991. The place is Buhoci, a rural commune in Bacău County in the east of Romania. If you've never been, picture rolling green farmland, narrow village roads, painted wooden houses with steep red roofs, and the kind of slow agricultural rhythm of life that hasn't really changed in 100 years. Romania is in a strange transitional moment too. The Ceausescu regime fell less than 2 years earlier in a violent revolution. The country is unstable, the economy is chaotic, and people are improvising. But in the village of Buhoci, life is still life. People still farm. People still trade cattle. People still take the train into the next town to do business. And one of those people is Vasile Gorgos. He is 63 years old. He's a farmer. He's a cattle merchant, a man who knows the regional livestock routes and the train timetables better than most people know their own families. He has a wife. He has children. He has roots in this village that go back generations. He is also, by every account, a creature of habit. He is not the kind of man who wanders off. He is not impulsive. He's not a drinker who goes on benders. He has no debts. He has no enemies. He has no secret second life waiting somewhere. He is, in the most literal possible sense, the least likely man in this village to vanish. On the day in question, he does exactly what he's done 100 times before. He puts on his work clothes. He puts his identity card in his pocket. He buys a round-trip train ticket, a return ticket, to the city of Ploiești, where he plans to conduct a routine livestock transaction. He says goodbye to his family, and he walks out the door. He never comes back. The family panics immediately. Vasile is not the kind of man who misses a return train. They contact the local police. The Romanian authorities open a missing persons case, and here's what they find. Nothing, no body, no accident report, no unidentified corpse in any morgue, no witness who saw him get off the train, no record of any altercation, no record of any criminal incident, no bank withdrawals, no new identity surfacing somewhere, no trace of him on any platform, in any hotel, on any road. It is as if the man stepped onto that train in 1991 and stepped directly off the edge of the earth. The investigation runs cold within months. The family does what people do. They grieve. They mourn. In a deeply Orthodox Christian culture, that means religious memorial services, and Vasile's family holds them year after year, asking the church to pray for the soul of the man they assume was murdered, robbed, dumped somewhere, lost forever. Years go by. His wife ages. His children become middle-aged. His daughter-in-law, who had been a young woman in 1991, becomes a grandmother. The trees in the yard grow tall. The world changes around them. The Berlin Wall, which fell 2 years before Vasile vanished, becomes a history book chapter. Romania joins the European Union. Mobile phones arrive. The internet arrives, smartphones arrive, and through all of it, every so often, somebody in the family lights a candle for the old man who got on the train. 30 years. I want you to really hold on to that number for a second. 30 years isn't a long absence. 30 years is enough time to have a child, raise that child, send them to college, watch them get married, and watch them have a child of their own. 30 years is a generation. 30 years is so long that by the time the story comes back to life, most of the people who remembered Vasilei's face at 63 are gone themselves. Then comes Sunday, August 29th, 2021. It's a quiet evening. The Gorgos house in Buhochi sits where it has always sat. The family is going about their business, and out on the road in front of the property, neighbors look up because a car they don't recognize is slowing down. It pulls up. It stops. The door opens. An extremely old, thin, disoriented man is helped out of the vehicle. He stands there on shaky legs, looking around like he isn't sure which gate is the right one. The car door slams, the engine roars, and the vehicle peels off down the village road and is gone before anyone in the family even makes it outside. Vasilei's daughter-in-law walks to the gate to see what the commotion is, and when she gets a good look at the old man swaying gently by the fence, she nearly collapses. It's him. It is unmistakably, undeniably him. The face has aged, the hair is white, he is now 93 years old, but it is Vasily Gorgos, standing at his own front gate, alive. Okay, stop. Take a breath, because we now need to do the part of this story that I really want you to pay attention to. Because this is where this case stops being a miracle and starts becoming one of the most unsettling things you will ever hear. Let's look at the details of his return. Detail number 1. The clothes. Vasily Gorgos stepped out of that car wearing the exact same clothes he had been wearing on the day he disappeared in the summer of 1991. We're not talking about similar clothes. We're not talking about a similar style. We are talking, according to his own family who knew his wardrobe intimately, about the literal same garments he walked out the door in 30 years earlier. Now, think about this for a second. What do your clothes look like after 30 years? If you took a shirt you owned in 1991, threw it in a closet, and pulled it out today, even if no one wore it once, it would be moth-eaten, faded. The fibers would have broken down, the smell would be wrong. But these clothes, they weren't ruined. He was wearing them. They had clearly been preserved, cared for, kept somewhere stable and clean enough that they survived 3 decades in wearable condition. Clothes do not stay pristine for 30 years on their own. Detail number 2. The ticket. When the family, in their stunned haze, started checking the old man's pockets for any clue at all about where he had been, they found something that made absolutely no logical sense. Right there in his pocket, alongside his aged 1991 identity card, was his original Baku to Ploiești round-trip train ticket. The exact ticket he had bought on the morning of his disappearance, 30 years old, intact, folded in his pocket like it had been placed there moments before. Hold on a second. Let's look at that again. If you had wandered off, lost your memory, lived as a vagrant for 30 years, your pockets would not contain a 1991 train ticket in pristine condition. Pockets get emptied, clothes get changed, tickets disintegrate. The only way a 30-year-old train ticket ends up in your pocket on the night you reappear is if somebody put it there. Recently, deliberately, as if completing a circle. Detail number 3, his health. Doctors examined Vasily after his return. The man was 93 years old. He should have been a wreck. If he had been a vagrant, living rough, drinking from streams, sleeping under bridges for 3 decades, he would have been dead long ago. Or at minimum, he would have been malnourished, sun-damaged, broken-toothed, sick. He wasn't. He was, according to medical examinations, in remarkably good shape for a man his age, clean, well-fed, cognitively intact except for one specific gap that we'll come to in a second. He showed only the kind of minor cognitive decline you'd expect in any healthy 93-year-old. But here's the question that nobody in this family can shake. Who took care of him? A 93-year-old does not survive on his own. Somebody, somewhere, was feeding this man, bathing him, giving him a place to sleep, making sure his clothes were preserved, making sure his pocket still held a 1991 train ticket for 30 years. Who? Detail number 4, the memory. When his family, crying, hugging him in absolute shock, finally asked him the only question that mattered, "Where have you been for 30 years?" Vasily gave them a one-word answer. He said simply, "Acasă," which in Romanian means at home. He genuinely seemed to believe he had been only a few days away. He remembered everything from before 1991 in perfect detail. He remembered his house, his village, his wife, his children, his routines, his business contacts. But the entire span from 1991 to 2021, every leaf, every season, every face, was a complete, impenetrable, clean blank. Not a fog, not a struggle to remember, a perfect void, as if those 30 years had been surgically excised from his brain. And detail number 5, the one that haunts me the most. The car. Whoever dropped Vasily Gorgos off at his own front gate in August 2021 did not knock on the door. They did not walk him to his family. They did not introduce themselves. They did not leave a name, a number, a note, or an explanation. They opened the door, set the old man down on the dirt, and floored it down the road before anyone could even get a look at the license plate. Now, ask yourself, if you were a good Samaritan, let's say you found a confused old man somewhere, and you finally figured out where his family lived, what would you do? You'd walk him to the door. You'd want the family to thank you. You'd want to explain. You'd want to know he was safe. Any decent person, in any culture, in any country, behaves that way. You only floor the gas pedal away from the gate if you have a reason to not be seen. So what actually happened to Vasily Gorgos? Some psychiatrists have leaned into the idea of a massive dissociative disorder, a brain that partitioned itself, lived a second life somewhere as a different person, and then was suddenly triggered back into Vasily after 30 years. It is a theory. It does not really explain the pristine clothes. It does not really explain the careful preservation of the 1991 train ticket. And it does not at all explain the speeding car. The darker theory, and the one that I think most investigators quietly suspect, is much grimmer. There is a possibility that Vasily Gorgos, on his way to Ploiești in 1991, was abducted, taken to a remote rural location, used as forced agricultural labor in a country that had just emerged from a brutal regime and was, in its quieter corners, still very lawless, and kept that way for 30 years, until he became too old to work. And his captors, practical, cold, not entirely cruel, decided the simplest disposal was not violence, but to put him in a car, drive him to the address on his 1991 ID card, set him down on the dirt at his own gate, and disappear. Hand him back, with his 1991 ticket in his 1991 clothes, like returning a tool to its toolbox. We will never know, because Vasily Gorgos, the only living person who could possibly tell us, genuinely does not remember. The Gorgos family got their patriarch back. He lived out his final years in his own house, in his own bed, surrounded by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren he had never gotten to meet. But they will spend the rest of their lives sharing that house with a ghost they cannot name. Because somewhere out in Romania, maybe still alive, maybe long dead, there's a person or a group of people who knew Vasily Gorgos better than his own family did for 30 years, who fed him, who clothed him, who kept his train ticket safe in a drawer, who, when the time came, drove him home. And that person knows everything, and Vasily knows nothing. Sometimes the scariest thing about a missing persons case isn't that they never come back. It's that they do come back, and they bring a 30-year void back with them. And somewhere out there, in the silence, somebody is still holding the other end of that story. And they are never, ever going to tell. Picture this. A small church in Arizona, sometime in the autumn of 1980. The pastor's going about his day. He looks up. 2 women have just walked in. They are dressed head to toe in long white robes. They are barefoot, no shoes. They are carrying an infant girl. They hand her to the pastor along with her birth certificate and a handwritten note allegedly signed by her father, voluntarily giving up his parental rights. They say almost nothing about who they are. They turn around. They walk out into the desert sun. And they are gone. The baby they just handed over is named Holly Marie Klaus. She is 10 months old. She is the only living witness to what happened to her parents. And what happened to her parents was sitting at that very moment, decomposing in a wooded patch of Harris County, Texas, roughly 1,000 miles east of that Arizona church. This is the story of Dean and Tina Klaus and the daughter who didn't know she had survived a massacre. Let's set the scene. It's 1980. The sun-baked Florida summer is just starting to roll into autumn. The country is at this weird hinge point where the 1970s counterculture hasn't quite died yet, but the polished, shoulder-padded 80s haven't kicked in either. Drifters still hitchhike on highway shoulders. Cults still wander the back roads, recruiting. There are no cell phones, no internet, no GPS. If you want to disappear into America in 1980, all you really have to do is walk into the gap between phone calls and not walk out again. In Volusia County, Florida, you've got the Klaus family. Specifically, Harold Dean Klaus Jr. Everyone calls him Dean, who is 21 years old. He's married to 15-year-old, yes, you read that right, Tina Gail Lynn. By the time of our story, she's 17. They are baby-faced, broke, and absolutely in love. And they have just had a baby of their own. A little girl, born January 24th, 1980. Her name is Holly Marie. Dean is a cabinet maker, carpentry. He has a real skill. And in late 1980, a job opportunity comes through that the young family can't pass up. There's a construction boom happening in Texas. Cabinet makers are in demand. So Dean and Tina pack up everything they own, kiss their Florida families goodbye, and drive west to Louisville, a Texas suburb just north of Dallas, chasing a slightly better life. This is the start of the American dream, the way they imagined it. 2 kids, a baby, a beat-up car, and a job waiting at the end of a highway. Letters fly back and forth. Phone calls, photos in the mail. Dean and Tina are in touch, constantly. The Klaus and Lynn families back in Florida know exactly what's happening. They know the address, they know the job, they know what the baby's doing this week. And then, in late October of 1980, the letters stop, the phone calls stop, the photos stop. Just silence. Now, Dean's mother isn't an idiot. She knows something is off, but she also knows her son. He's a busy 21-year-old with a newborn and a new job in a new state. He's probably exhausted. He'll call soon. He always calls. He doesn't call. Weeks turn into months. The worry starts to climb into the back of her throat. She starts making her own calls. She doesn't get answers. And then, sometime later, the phone in Florida finally does ring. It's not Dean, it's a woman. The voice on the other end is calm, almost polite. She says her name is Sister Susan. She says she belongs to a religious community. She says Dean and Tina have made a beautiful decision. They have voluntarily joined her group. They've given up all their worldly possessions. They've embraced a new spiritual life. They want to cut ties with their old families. They want a fresh start. And, oh, Sister Susan adds almost casually, the group still has Dean's car. They'd be willing to return it for a fee. Hold on a second. Let's look at that again. Because every single thing about this phone call should make your skin crawl. You are a mother. Your son and his wife and your infant granddaughter have gone silent. And the first communication you get is not from your son. It's from a stranger. A stranger who says your son no longer wants to talk to you. A stranger who is offering to sell you back his car. If Dean voluntarily joined a religious group, Dean picks up the phone. Dean writes the letter. Dean tells his own mother. He doesn't outsource it to a woman in a robe. But the family agrees to a meeting. Of course they do. What else can they do? They set up a rendezvous in Daytona, Florida. And what shows up to that meeting is something out of a horror movie. 3 women emerge from Dean's car. They are wearing long, flowing white robes. They are barefoot. They look like they have stepped out of a desert pilgrimage from 2,000 years ago. They are members of a nomadic cult known as the Christ family. The Christ family wandered the American West in the late 70s and early 80s, strict, vegetarian, supposedly pacifist, traveling in white robes, rejecting all worldly possessions. They didn't even wear leather shoes. They believed it caused death. The police are called The women are briefly questioned. But here's the legal problem. Dean and Tina are technically adults. Adults are allowed to join cults. Adults are allowed to give away cars. There's no body. There's no crime scene. There's no evidence anyone has been harmed. The robed women hand the car keys over and walk away. The family is horrified. They assume their son and daughter-in-law have been brainwashed. They start praying that one day Dean and Tina will snap out of it and come home. That day will never come. Because months earlier, something terrible has already happened. Rewind a few months. January 12th, 1981. Houston, Texas. A man is walking his dog in a dense wooded area near Wallaceville Road in Harris County. The dog trots off into the underbrush, the way dogs do. The man calls for it. Eventually, the dog comes back. The dog returned with human remains. Police descend on the woods, and in the trees, they find the bodies of a young man and a young woman, heavily decomposed. The young man had suffered severe blunt force trauma, and the young woman had been asphyxiated. The scene indicated a highly targeted double homicide, but the bodies have no ID, no wallet, no driver's license, no nothing. In 1981, with no DNA databases, no facial reconstruction technology that means much, no fingerprints on file for two random kids from out of state, the bodies become a John and Jane Doe. They go into the morgue, their photos get filed in a drawer, and the case slowly dies. Nobody in Texas knows that in Florida, there's a family screaming into the void looking for a missing son. And nobody in Florida knows that the bodies in those Texas woods are theirs. For 40 years, those two cases sit there, side by side, unconnected, the Klaus family slowly aging, slowly mourning, never knowing. The Houston cold case detectives slowly retiring, slowly forgetting, never knowing. And the most important question, where is the baby, isn't even being asked, because no one knows there was a baby. Then, in 2011, the Houston Doe bodies are exhumed. Forensic genealogists at a private lab called Identifinders International get to work. They extract usable DNA from the remains. They upload the genetic profiles into the same kinds of public databases now famously used to catch the Golden State Killer. And on January 12th, 2021, exactly 40 years to the day from when those bodies were discovered, the lab confirms the identifications. The young man in the woods is Harold Dean Klaus Jr. The young woman is Tina Gail Lynn Klaus. The Klaus family gets the worst phone call of their lives 4 decades late. Their son was not in a cult. Their son was murdered. Their daughter-in-law was murdered. They had been mourning the wrong tragedy for 40 years. And then, almost immediately, the detectives realize something else, something that makes everyone in the room go cold. Dean and Tina weren't traveling alone. Where is baby Holly? Okay, time to stop and look at this case in cold daylight, because the actions of these so-called Christ family members make absolutely no sense. Think about this for a second. If you have just murdered 2 people in the woods of Houston, Texas, viciously with your hands, with rope, with violence, what is the very last thing on the planet you should do next? You should not take their personal car, and you should especially not take it 1,000 miles back to Florida. And you should most especially not call up the murdered man's mother and arrange to meet her in person. What kind of killers do that? You burn the car. You ditch it in a swamp. You drive it out into the desert and torch it. You don't hand-deliver the murdered guy's vehicle to his own mother in Daytona Beach. But they did. And they were so brazen about it that they tried to extort cash from her on top of it. That is not the behavior of people who think they did anything wrong. That is the behavior of people who genuinely believe they are untouchable. And then there's the baby. Dean and Tina Klaus were the victims of a fatal targeted assault. Forensic evidence indicated it was a deeply personal crime. The kind of killer who does that by every criminological metric is not the kind of killer who suddenly develops a soft spot for a 10-month-old infant. But they spared Holly. They didn't kill her. They didn't dump her. They didn't leave her in the woods with her parents. And here is the truly baffling part. They didn't keep her either. If a cult murdered Dean and Tina specifically to steal their baby, for some twisted spiritual reason, to raise her into the movement, That would at least give us a sick, coherent motive. Cults have done worse for less. But they didn't keep Holly. They drove her across state lines to Arizona. They walked her into a church. They handed her, with her birth certificate and a note allegedly forging Dean's signature, voluntarily giving up his parental rights, to a complete stranger, to a pastor named Philip McGoldrick. McGoldrick and his family had no idea what they were taking in. They genuinely believed they were rescuing a child who had been surrendered by a fringe religious sect. They legally adopted her. They renamed her. They raised her in Oklahoma. With love. With stability. With a normal, quiet childhood. So the individuals responsible for the deaths of Dean and Tina took a baby they did not want, drove her halfway across the country, and dropped her off at a church. Why? Why? That is the question that nobody has ever answered. The Christ family publicly claimed to be strict pacifists. They didn't even eat meat, too violent. They didn't wear leather, too cruel. And yet, the only evidence we have ties them, or somebody very close to them, to a brutal hands-on double homicide. Were Dean and Tina trying to leave the group and they were killed for it? Were they killed because they refused to hand Holly over to the group's leadership? Did they witness something they weren't supposed to see? Did one of the cult's members snap and the others scramble to contain it, keeping the baby alive because killing an infant was a moral line even they wouldn't cross? We don't know. We may never know. In June 2022, investigators traced the paper trail. There was a tiny database mismatch between Holly and Holly that flagged the case. They pulled at the thread. The thread led to a sealed adoption certificate. They petitioned the courts to unseal it. The trail led finally to a woman in Oklahoma. She was 42 years old. She was a wife. She was a mother of 5. She was a grandmother already. She was named Holly Marie Miller, formerly Klaus. She had no idea. She had no idea her real parents had been murdered in the woods. She had no idea her real grandmother had been mourning her since before she could speak. She had no idea she had aunts and uncles and cousins who shared her DNA scattered across Florida. She had been raised in a loving home, given a happy life, and grown into a stable, content adult, with no clue that her existence was the only living evidence of one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in modern American history. On June 7, 2022, which, in a detail that breaks my heart every time I think about it, would have been her biological father Dean's birthday, she met her biological extended family for the first time. Over Zoom. A computer screen full of strangers who looked just enough like her to be unmistakable. She got to meet them in person in Florida that November. So that's the light. Holly survived. Holly's alive. Holly was loved every single day of her life by people who didn't know what they had saved her from. But the darkness is still out there. Because the people who killed Dean and Tina Klaus in the woods of Houston in 1980, the people in the long white robes with the bare feet, the people who took a baby on a 1,000-mile road trip and dropped her at a church door, those people have never been charged. Sister Susan, whoever she really was, has never been brought to justice. And somewhere, possibly still alive today, possibly long dead, are the people who beat a 21-year-old kid to death and strangled his teenage wife, and for some reason that we will probably never understand, looked down at their 10-month-old daughter sleeping in the back seat of a stolen car and decided to let her live. Holly Marie Klaus came back from the dead, but the only witnesses to her own beginning are still walking free. Picture a man calling his wife on a Sydney summer afternoon. The line crackles a little. It's 1987. This is a workplace phone, not a mobile. He tells her he's wrapping up at the office and heading home for lunch. She says she'll have something ready. She hangs up. She sets the table. He never comes home. A few days later, the police find his car. Not parked at a restaurant, not pulled over on the side of the road, not at a friend's house. They find it in a rough inner-city suburb across town, completely burnt out. A blackened, gutted shell. No body inside, no witnesses, nothing. His wife and 2 young kids will spend the next 23 years assuming he was murdered that afternoon. They will be half right. This is the story of Gabriel Nagy. And honestly, It is one of the most heartbreaking, medically baffling disappearances in Australian history, because the man they were looking for, the husband, the father, the colleague, that man genuinely did die that day. He just didn't know it, and his body kept walking around for the next 2 decades anyway. Let's set the scene. It's early 1987, Sydney, Australia, specifically the coastal suburb of Maroubra, a sun-bleached neighborhood on the eastern edge of the city, just down from Bondi. White surf, red-tiled rooftops, the smell of salt and eucalyptus in the air. It's the kind of working-class beachside suburb where families know each other from school drop-offs, and where the weekends are spent in the surf and the backyards are filled with kids yelling over the sound of cricket on the radio. In one of those homes lives Gabriel Nagy. He's a working professional. He commutes into Sydney proper for his job. He's a husband. His wife's name is Pamela. He's a father. His 2 kids are 9 and 11 years old. He is, by every measurable indicator, a standard Australian family man. He doesn't have a criminal record. He doesn't have a drinking problem. He doesn't have a mistress. He doesn't have crippling debt. He doesn't have a side hustle that went sideways. He doesn't have enemies. His marriage is solid. His kids adore him. In other words, there is nothing about Gabriel Nagy in early 1987 that fits the profile of a man about to vanish. That's what makes it so impossible. On the day he disappeared, he did what he always did. He went to work in Sydney. He worked his normal shift. Around midday, he called Pamela and told her he was heading home for lunch, the kind of routine, midweek, midday check-in that he'd done 1,000 times. He hung up. He walked out the office door. He got into his car. And then he simply stopped existing. Pamela waited. Lunch went cold. Afternoon came. Evening came. No phone call, no Gabriel. By the time night fell, the police were involved. By the next morning, it was a full-scale missing persons case. And a couple of days later, the case took the turn that would define it for the next quarter of a century. Gabriel's car was found. But here's the thing. It wasn't found anywhere near Maroubra. It wasn't found near his work. It wasn't found on any logical route between those 2 points. It was found across town in Redfern, a tough, gritty inner-city suburb of Sydney with a hard reputation in the late 1980s. And the car wasn't just abandoned, it was destroyed, burnt to a crisp, a blackened, twisted, gutted shell of a vehicle. Glass melted, interior gone. Just the metal skeleton sitting on charred rubber where its tires used to be. But here's the part that punched the police in the gut. There was no body inside. Now, this is where investigators in 1987 made the assumption that any of us would have made. Because in any cop's experience, when you find a missing man's car burned to the ground in a rough neighborhood, you're looking at one thing and one thing only: foul play. Specifically, the kind of foul play where somebody murders somebody, dumps the body somewhere remote, and then drives the victim's car to the worst part of town and torches it to destroy the evidence. Fingerprints, blood, fibers, all of it gone in a single fireball. So police treated this as a homicide. They looked for a body. They didn't find one. They looked for suspects. They didn't find any. They looked for a motive. There wasn't one. They looked into Gabriel's life. Clean. Into his finances, clean. Into his relationships, clean. There was no insurance scam, no affair gone wrong, no business deal that turned violent. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And so, slowly, inevitably, the case ran out of leads. It went into a drawer, then it went into a filing cabinet, then it went into a basement. The active investigation died. The cold case began. Pamela and the 2 kids, now growing up without their dad, settled into the worst kind of grief there is. The grief without a body. The grief without an answer. The grief where you don't know if you should bury someone or keep waiting for the phone to ring. 23 years would pass like that. Fast forward to early 2010. The case is so old now that the Nagy family has, with enormous reluctance, made a decision. They are going to apply for a coronial inquest. In Australia, when a person has been missing long enough with no trace, a coroner can legally declare them dead, without a body, so that the family can finally settle the estate, finalize the paperwork, and put the ghost to rest. That inquest is scheduled. The hearing date is set. The family is, in essence, finally giving up. But over at New South Wales Police, there's a cold case detective named Georgia Robinson, a senior constable who would later be promoted to sergeant. And Robinson has been quietly turning this case over in her head for years. She has run hypothesis after hypothesis. Maybe he joined a cult. Maybe he had unreported crimes he was running from. Maybe a secret debt. Maybe he just walked out on his life voluntarily. She has considered every angle the standard police playbook allows for. And with the inquest just 2 weeks away, 14 days before Gabriel Nagy would be legally pronounced dead, Robinson does one last thing. She runs his name through a database she hasn't tried before. Medicare. For those of you who don't know, Medicare in Australia is the national publicly funded universal healthcare system. Every citizen has a Medicare number. Every doctor's visit, every hospital admission, every prescription, it all eventually pings the federal registry. Robinson types Gabriel Nagy's name in, hits enter. It comes back hot. Somebody with Gabriel Nagy's exact name has been recently accessing medical care in Australia. Not in 1987, not in 1990. Recently, like this year, that somebody is in a city called Mackay, which is over 1,000 miles north of Sydney, up in tropical Queensland. Robinson gets on a plane. What she found in Mackay is one of the most heartbreaking scenes in modern Australian policing. She found Gabriel Nagy, alive, older, thinner, aged hard by 23 years of a life she could not have begun to imagine. He had been living as a transient, a drifter. He had no fixed address, no real possessions. He had been sleeping rough, taking odd jobs, drifting up the Queensland coast for 2 decades. In Mackay, a local church pastor had taken him in out of pure charity and given him a roof. He had no idea who he was, not in the dramatic Hollywood way, not in the vague flashbacks and tortured looks way, in the real, clinical, devastating way. He genuinely did not know that his name was Gabriel Nagy. He did not know he had a wife named Pamela. He did not know he had 2 children. He did not know he had ever lived in Sydney or worked in an office or driven a car or shared lunch with anyone ever in his whole life. The man had a severe brain injury, the kind that doctors call traumatic dissociative amnesia, the kind that doesn't just take memories away, it takes the self away. He was, in every meaningful psychological sense, a different person now. A man with no past, living in a perpetual present, in a town 1,000 miles from his own family. Now, this is where it gets strange, and this is the question that has never been definitively answered. If Gabriel just had a medical episode, a sudden stroke or a seizure or a fugue, and wandered off, who burned his car? Amnesia doesn't torch vehicles. Confusion doesn't drive a car 20-something kilometers across Sydney to Redfern and set it on fire. A dissociative state doesn't have the cognitive coherence to plan an arson. So look at the facts. We have a man who, on the same afternoon that he lost his entire identity, also had his vehicle driven to a rough neighborhood and incinerated. Either Gabriel did it himself in some violently confused last act before his brain went dark, and that is possible, or somebody else did it. Somebody who attacked him, struck him hard enough to shatter his memory, took his car, drove it across town, and burned it to destroy the evidence of whatever they had done. Under that second theory, Gabriel was the victim of an assault that nearly killed him. He survived. His attackers didn't know he survived. They thought they were torching the car of a dead man. And meanwhile, Gabriel, concussed, dissociated, his identity obliterated by the trauma, wandered out of Sydney with no memory of who he was, no money, no documents, and no idea that anyone was looking for him. Nobody has ever proven which theory is right. The case officially sits on the medical explanation, but that burnt-out car in Redfern is a ghost in the file that nobody has ever fully exorcised. And then there's the survival question. Because honestly, how? How does a man with no memory, no skills he can articulate, no documents, no identity, and a severe traumatic brain injury survive for 23 years in a major modern country without slipping through every possible safety net? He didn't take an alias and rebuild a polished new life. He didn't go to a hospital. He didn't get into the welfare system. He didn't even know to. He just drifted. He took odd jobs. He slept where he could. He depended on the charity of strangers. He was, in the most literal sense, a ghost, moving through suburbs and small towns, a quiet, broken man with no name and no story. And the only reason he was ever found at all, the only reason, is that eventually his 90-something-year-old body finally needed medical care. And to get medical care in Australia, you have to engage with Medicare. And the moment he did, a digital tripwire 2,000 kilometers away in Sydney lit up like a flare. He didn't solve his case. His own aging body did. The reunion was bittersweet in the most painful way. Pamela and the kids, who were now adults with their own families, were given the impossible miracle of Gabriel back from the dead. There was a deeply emotional reunion with his daughter Jennifer at the airport. Cameras, hugs, tears. But here's the part that breaks me every time. The man getting off that plane was not the man who had walked out of his Sydney office on that summer afternoon in 1987. He was looking at strangers. He knew, intellectually, that the woman crying in front of him was supposed to be his wife. He knew, intellectually, that the people calling him Dad were his kids. But he didn't remember them. He couldn't. The cognitive chasm of those 23 lost years could not be bridged. The damage was permanent. The Nagy family got a husband and a father back. But the husband they had married, and the father those kids had played with, that man had died in the burnt-out car in Redfern in 1987. They just never found the body, because the body was still walking around. Just under different management, Gabriel lived out his final years surrounded by his biological family in the strangest peace any of them could have asked for. He eventually passed away. The case was finally, technically, closed. But the question of who set fire to that car, that question was never answered, and it never will be. Because the only person who could possibly know what happened in Redfern on that summer afternoon in 1987 had his memory of it burned away in the very same incident. A burnt car, in any other case, marks the end of someone's life. For Gabriel Nagy, it just marked the beginning of someone else's. Picture this. A man rents a small fishing boat on Lake Erie on the afternoon of May 15th, 1957. The Coast Guard has been broadcasting severe storm warnings all day. The marina owner literally tells him not to go out. He goes anyway. A few hours later, a violent storm rolls in over the lake. The next morning, his boat is found beaten up and washed ashore, missing an oar, empty, no body. His wife, 5 months pregnant with their 4th child, collapses. The Coast Guard tells her survival in that storm was impossible. The community mourns. 3 years pass. He is legally declared dead. His widow cashes in a $39,500 life insurance policy that conveniently wipes out the mountain of debt he left behind. The kids start to forget what his face looked like. Life moves on. 8 years later, in 1965, a woman from Akron, Ohio is visiting Omaha, Nebraska on a trip. She turns on the television in her hotel room. There's a local sports broadcast happening. A flamboyant, larger-than-life sports director is on the screen, charming the camera, wearing a black eye patch, telling jokes, working the audience like a Vegas headliner. She drops her bag. Because under the mustache, under the eye patch, under the new name and the new state and the new life, she is 100% certain that the television star smiling out of that screen is the dead man from her hometown. This is the story of Lawrence Joseph Bader. And by the time you finish hearing it, I promise you will not be able to decide whether he was the unluckiest brain tumor patient in American history or the most brazen sociopath of the 20th century. Let's set the scene. It is May of 1957, Akron, Ohio, the peak of buttoned-down Eisenhower-era post-war America, the kind of decade where every man on every street is supposed to have a steady job, a station wagon in the driveway, a tidy wife in the kitchen, and a couple of well-behaved kids running around the lawn. The pressure to look successful in 1950s suburbia was suffocating. There was no acceptable way to fail in public. You faked the prosperity until you actually had it, or until it killed you. Lawrence Joseph Bader was, on paper, exactly that man. 30 years old, cookware salesman for the Reynolds Metals Corporation, wife named Mary Lou, and she is 5 months pregnant with their 4th child. 3 little ones at home already. Nice suburban setup. Polite smile at the neighbors when he pulls out of the driveway in the morning. Underneath the polite smile, Lawrence is drowning. He has $20,000 in debt. And I want you to understand what $20,000 meant in 1957. That is not a credit card bill. That is roughly the price of a couple of houses at the time. The man is underwater. He has a long, embarrassing history of failed get-rich-quick schemes. The IRS is circling him for unpaid income taxes, the kind of unpaid taxes that come with real scary federal penalties. The walls are closing in. And then there is this detail, this one little detail that, after the fact, lights up the whole story like a flare. Right before May 15, 1957, Lawrence quietly increased his life insurance policy. Hold on to that. It matters. On the morning of May 15, 1957, Lawrence kisses his pregnant wife goodbye and tells her he's heading to Cleveland for a routine business trip. Maybe he'll do a little fishing on Lake Erie while he's at it, he says. What he actually does is this. He drives to Cleveland. He stops at the bank. He cashes a check for $400, not a small sum in 1957. He pays a premium installment on his freshly increased life insurance policy, locking it in, making sure it's current, making sure if anything were to happen to him, the policy would pay out clean. Then he goes to a little marina called Eddie's Boathouse. He rents a 14-foot fishing boat. The marina owner looks at the sky and tells him not to go. The Coast Guard has been issuing storm warnings on the radio all morning. The lake is dangerous today. Lawrence ignores them. He takes the boat out anyway. A violent storm rolls in over the lake that afternoon. By the next day, the search has started. Lawrence's rental boat eventually washes up, beaten, splintered, missing one of its oars, completely empty. The Coast Guard runs the math: wind speed, water temperature, the size of the boat, the violence of the squall. They conclude that no human being could have survived those conditions on Lake Erie that day. The search shifts from rescue to recovery. No body is ever found. For 3 years, the case sits there. Mary Lou raises the kids alone. She grieves. Eventually, in 1960, Lawrence Joseph Bader is officially, legally declared dead. The life insurance policy, the one he so carefully kept current the morning of his disappearance, pays out $39,500. Mary Lou's debts vanish. She starts collecting Social Security survivor benefits for the kids. The family slowly, painfully climbs out of the financial pit her late husband had dug. For the Bader family in Akron, the story is over. Tragic, but over. Except, of course it isn't over. Because 4 days after Lawrence Bader vanished into a storm on Lake Erie, a man walked into a place called the Round Table Bar in Omaha, Nebraska, over 700 miles away. He ordered a drink. He chatted up the bartender. He introduced himself. His name, he said, was John Francis Johnson. People could call him Fritz. Now, this is where it gets incredibly strange. Because most fugitives, most people committing federal insurance fraud, would head straight underground, change their hair, lay low, get a quiet, anonymous job in a warehouse somewhere, never speak to anyone, never put their face anywhere it could be photographed, disappear into a small life. That is not what Fritz Johnson did. Fritz Johnson, on arriving in Omaha as a complete stranger with no past, decided to become the loudest, most attention-seeking person in the city. His first big public splash? To raise money for polio, this guy decided to sit on a flagpole for 30 days. Yes, you heard me. He climbed up on a flagpole and stayed there for a month as a charity stunt. The local newspapers ate it up. His face was in the paper. His name was on the radio. Suddenly, this stranger nobody had ever heard of was a local human interest story. That got him an audition at the local TV station. He was charismatic, he was telegenic, he was funny, he was sharp. KETV7 hired him, and just like that, Fritz Johnson became a television sports director. He was on the air, on a Nebraska TV station, reading scores, doing live remotes, interviewing local athletes. His face was beaming into living rooms across Omaha 5 nights a week. He drove a hearse. an actual converted hearse, with a bar built into the back and an incense burner on the dashboard. That was his thing. That was the bit. He got remarried to a 20-year-old divorcee named Nancy Zimmer. He adopted her daughter. He had a biological son with her. He built an entire vibrant, flamboyant, public second life. Now hold on a second. Let's look at that again. If you faked your death on Lake Erie to escape the IRS and a mountain of debt, the entire point of doing something that drastic is to never be seen by the federal government again. You don't put your face on TV. You don't run polio stunts that get into the newspapers. You don't become the loudest sports announcer in a Midwestern market. What Fritz Johnson did, in pure self-preservation terms, was entirely self-destructive and strategically illogical. It is the worst hiding spot in the history of hiding spots. He was broadcasting his face to thousands of people every single night, and that is the first clue that something more interesting than simple insurance fraud is going on here. Then, in 1964, Fritz's life took a sudden dark turn. A doctor discovered a malignant tumor growing behind his left eye. The eye had to be surgically removed. Fritz Johnson, the flamboyant TV star, now wore a striking black eye patch on the air. Honestly, it probably made him more famous. He looked like a sports radio pirate. Local Omaha loved it. But here's the wild card the medical community would later raise. That tumor, the one that took his eye in 1964, what if it had been slowly growing in his head since 1957? What if it had been pressing all those years against the part of his brain responsible for memory and identity? Because in February 1965, the universe finally caught up with him. He was at a sporting goods convention in Chicago, demonstrating archery equipment. Fritz Johnson, by the way, was a passionate archer, just like Lawrence Bader had been. A passion that supposedly survived the amnesia, and an acquaintance from his old life in Akron happened to be walking through the convention floor. The acquaintance stopped, stared. The mustache was new. The eye patch was new. The name was wrong, but the face under it all was unmistakable. This person contacted Lawrence Bader's 21-year-old niece, Suzanne Peka, who happened to be nearby in Chicago. Suzanne walked right up to the famous television star at his booth and asked him, in plain English, "Pardon me, but aren't you my Uncle Larry Bader, who disappeared 7 years ago?" Fritz Johnson laughed. He genuinely, by all accounts, seemed confused. He said he had no idea what she was talking about. He was Fritz Johnson. He had always been Fritz Johnson. But Suzanne wasn't buying it. She told her family in Akron. The family went to the police. The police got fingerprints from Fritz Johnson, compared them to Lawrence Bader's military records. 100% biometric match. The dead salesman from Lake Erie and the eye patch-wearing TV star from Omaha were exactly the same human being. Now we get to the part of this story that nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever definitively resolved. Was Lawrence Bader a brilliant con artist, or was he a tragic medical victim? Let's tear into both theories. The brilliant con artist theory has overwhelming circumstantial weight. He was drowning in debt. The IRS was at his door. He paid his life insurance premium the day he disappeared. He cashed a $400 check on the way to a marina where he ignored explicit storm warnings to take a small boat into deadly conditions. The boat washed up empty and damaged in exactly the way you'd want a boat to wash up if you were trying to suggest you died. And he was alive and chatting with a bartender in Nebraska 4 days later. The pieces fit so neatly together that it almost insults your intelligence to consider any other explanation. But then, the medical theory. Top psychiatrists evaluated him for 10 full days after his unmasking. He stuck to his story under intense professional scrutiny. He insisted he had no memory of being Lawrence Bader. He described the realization, when it finally came to him, as like a physical shock, like a door slamming shut in his face. And he had the tumor. The very real, very malignant tumor that had cost him his eye. The medical possibility that growth had been pressing on his brain since 1957 is not crazy. Dissociative fugue states triggered by neurological injury are documented in the literature, rare, but real. And then there's the part that does the most damage to the cold sociopath theory. If Lawrence Bader was a cunning fraudster who faked his death for the insurance money, he would have lain low. He would not have built a career broadcasting his face to thousands of strangers every night. He would not have been a public, recognizable celebrity in any Midwestern town. That behavior is insane for a man hiding from the IRS. Either Lawrence Bader was the worst judgment fraudster in American history, or some part of his brain genuinely did not know that there was anything to hide from. It is one or the other, and the evidence is split right down the middle. The legal and emotional fallout of his unmasking was a catastrophic train wreck for everyone involved. His first wife, Mary Lou, who had been a widow for years, suddenly wasn't anymore. Her legal status as a widow was revoked. As a devout Catholic, her new engagement was destroyed by the fact that, in the eyes of the church, she was still technically married to a living man. She was now liable for repaying the $39,500 in life insurance, plus years of Social Security survivor benefits, plunging her right back into the financial ruin Lawrence had supposedly drowned to save her from. His second wife, Nancy Zimmer, found her marriage legally nullified due to bigamy. She had married a man who, on paper, did not exist. She had a child by him. She had built a public life with him, and the man she had loved, Fritz Johnson, the eye-patch-wearing TV star, turned out to be, in some sense, a complete fiction. And then, in a final, almost theatrical twist, the universe decided the question for everyone. The tumor came back, aggressively. Lawrence Joseph Bader, also known as John Fritz Johnson, died of cancer on September 16, 1966, just about 18 months after being unmasked. To his very last breath, he insisted he had no memory of being Lawrence Bader. He went to his grave, still calling himself Fritz. Whatever the truth was, he took it with him. So which one was he? Was he a desperate cookware salesman who saw a financial cliff coming and engineered a Lake Erie escape act so theatrical it should have won an Oscar? A man who walked into a Nebraska bar 4 days later and started a brand new life, no amnesia required, just nerve? Or was he a man whose brain was slowly being eaten by a tumor since the mid-1950s, who genuinely lost himself in a fugue state somewhere on the dark water that night and woke up as somebody else without ever choosing it? We will never know. Lawrence Bader went onto a lake to escape his debts. Whether his brain broke or his morals did, the man who came back wasn't Lawrence at all. He was Fritz. And Fritz, until the very end, swore he was telling the truth. Picture this, it's 2008. A woman in Oregon is sitting on her couch, half paying attention to a true crime show flickering on her television. The episode is about a string of brutal murders in South Carolina, women vanishing from truck stops along Interstate 85, a confessed killer in the area, a community in terror. She's barely watching. Then the show puts up a photograph, a face, a presumed victim, still missing, body never found, believed to have been one of his. The woman in Oregon sits up, slowly, because she's looking at her neighbor, the woman the FBI has been searching for since 2002, the woman whose mother in South Carolina has been mourning her for 6 years as the corpse of a serial killer, the woman whose name is on missing posters from Spartanburg to the Atlantic. That woman lives across the street. She waves at her in the morning. She buys her groceries at the same little market on the corner. She is alive. She is fine. And she has been hiding in plain sight for 6 years. This is the story of Michelle Whitaker, and it is, hands down, one of the strangest one-in-a-million resolutions you will ever hear. Let's set the scene. It is August 2002, Spartanburg, South Carolina, the kind of place where Interstate 85 cuts straight through the middle of town like a river, and the lights of the gas stations and truck stops along it stay on all night. It's hot. It's humid. The cicadas don't stop screaming. And there's a dark, low-hanging cloud over the entire region because women have been disappearing. Not just any women. Women who work the night shifts, waitresses, hairdressers, women whose lives put them in the orbit of strangers, of late hours, of headlights pulling up to truck stop diners at 3 in the morning. A local man named Jonathan Vick is on the radar of the police. He has already been linked to the brutal murder of a hairdresser named Dana Satterfield. He is the prime suspect in the disappearance of a woman named Heather Sellers. The community is terrified. There's a real monster operating along that I-85 corridor. And in the middle of this, you've got Michelle Whitaker. People call her Shelly. She is 33 years old. She is not having a good year. She is not having a good life, honestly. She has been struggling with alcohol. She and her mother have been getting into the kind of huge, explosive fights that don't really get resolved. They just get paused until the next one. She works in food service. She has dreams that have not quite worked out and pain she has not quite processed. She is, in every demographic sense, one of those people that the world has a bad habit of looking past. And here is the detail that becomes important. Michelle works at a Waffle House, the exact same Waffle House where Heather Sellers, the woman feared to be a victim of Jonathan Vick, also worked. Same restaurant, same shift type, same demographic, same town, same hunting ground. On August 16th, 2002, Michelle has another one of those huge fights with her mother. She is drinking, she is emotional, she wants out. She wants to put miles between herself and that house, that argument, that whole feeling of, I am not wanted here. She hitches a ride, according to the case file, with either an acquaintance or a man she barely knew. The destination is a Truck Stops of America facility off Interstate 85. She gets dropped off there, and then silence. No phone calls, no bank withdrawals, no credit card swipes, no traffic stops, no emergency room visits, no body, nothing. Now, put yourself in the detective's shoes for a second. You are a Spartanburg cop in 2002. You have a missing 33-year-old woman with a troubled background. She vanished from an interstate truck stop. And in your back pocket, you've got a strong working theory about a regional predator named Jonathan Vick, who is suspected in the disappearance of a woman who worked at the exact same restaurant as Michelle. The two missing women probably knew each other. They almost certainly poured each other coffee at some point. What are you going to assume happened? You're going to assume the obvious. You're going to assume Michelle Whitaker is Jonathan Vick's next victim. You'd be a fool not to. And honestly, the math made it look airtight. 2 co-workers, same restaurant, same year, same town, both gone. There is a known killer at large. The Venn diagram is just one circle. So that's what happens. Detectives lean hard into the homicide theory. The case becomes part of the broader investigation into the Spartanburg area murders. They search the woods. They search the back roads. They dig at properties. They check abandoned wells. They follow up on every rumor of a shallow grave. They tell Michelle's mother to brace herself. They tell her, gently but firmly, that the daughter she lost is almost certainly out there in a ditch somewhere, and that the best she can hope for now is for the body to be recovered so she can be properly buried. Imagine that. Imagine being her mother. Imagine your last conversation with your daughter was a screaming fight. Imagine the days are passing and the police are telling you that your daughter was the victim of a serial predator, and that her life ended under horrific circumstances. Taken in an unspeakable way, you did not get to say goodbye. You did not get to hug her. You did not get to fix it. And the last words between you were ugly. That is the kind of grief that does not heal. That is the kind of grief that calcifies in the chest and lives there permanently. Michelle's mother spent 6 years carrying that weight, lighting candles, writing letters to investigators, calling for updates on the search, knowing that the man suspected of taking her daughter was sitting in a jail cell somewhere while the woods around Spartanburg refused to give up her child's bones. 6 years, and the entire time, here is what nobody knew. The entire time, Michelle was alive. She was in fact living a completely uneventful life in Oregon. Yeah, Oregon. 3,000 miles away from Spartanburg. Other side of the country, about as far as you can get from Interstate 85 without leaving the contiguous United States. She had quietly built a small, anonymous, off-the-grid life. She lived modestly. She used cash. She didn't draw attention to herself. She had a routine. She had neighbors. She had a fresh start. And she had no clue. No clue. No clue at all that her face was on missing persons posters all over the Southeast. No clue that the FBI had cleared a suspect's name based on her presumed murder. No clue that a serial killer was being mentally credited with her disappearance. No clue that her mother was lighting a candle for her every night. Now, hold on a second. Let's look at that again. Because this is one of the things about this case that is genuinely hard to wrap your head around. How do you, in modern America, in the 21st century, not know that you are listed as a probable serial killer victim? How do you not stumble across your own face on a news segment? How do you not Google your own name on a slow night and find your missing persons file? How do you not have a single old friend, a single cousin, a single co-worker from Spartanburg reach out and say, "Wait, what?" The answer is, she disciplined herself out of all of it. She did not use the internet to look up old friends. She did not look up her own name. She did not call home. She did not consume news from her old state. She lived deliberately, surgically off the grid. Not in a survivalist way, in a quiet way. In the way of someone who genuinely, in her bones, believed her family wanted nothing more to do with her after that final fight. The fight had told her, in her own mind, "They're done with you." And she took that and ran with it. Literally. She wasn't hiding from the cops. She wasn't hiding from a husband. She wasn't hiding from a drug dealer. She was hiding from a mother who, in reality, was praying for her to come home. And here is where the universe decides to do the most absurd thing imaginable. In 2008, 6 years after Michelle vanished, a true crime broadcast aired a segment on the Spartanburg area murders, the kind of show that recaps the killer, the victims, the suspects, the open cases. And toward the end of it, the segment listed the women still presumed missing, still presumed dead, still presumed to be uncounted victims of the predator who had haunted that I-85 corridor. They put Michelle Whitaker's face on the screen. A woman in Oregon, Michelle's neighbor, happened to be watching that exact show at that exact moment on that exact night. Think about the math of that for a second. Think about the staggering lottery odds. A woman sitting on a couch on the other side of the country watching a true crime documentary about a southern state she has no connection to. Looking up at the screen, at the very second, they show the face. And the face is her neighbor. She doesn't believe it at first. Nobody would. She looks again. She maybe pauses it. She maybe stares at it. And then she picks up the phone and calls the tip line. "That woman is not dead," she says. "She's my neighbor." When Spartanburg authorities followed that tip out to Oregon, fully expecting to find a body, a captive, or a clerical error, they instead knocked on a door, and a 39-year-old Michelle Whitaker opened it, healthy, independent, living her quiet, deliberate cash and routines life, not running from the law, not held against her will, just alive. The massive multi-agency homicide investigation collapsed in an afternoon, and Jonathan Vick, the suspected serial killer who had been carrying her presumed death on his record, was officially cleared of involvement in her case. Whatever Vick had done to other women, he did not do this one. Now, before we close this out, let's look at this with cold eyes, because there is a real lesson here, and it isn't a comfortable one. The Spartanburg detectives weren't bad cops. They were doing what the evidence told them to do. When you have a confessed or suspected predator hunting a specific demographic and someone from that exact demographic vanishes in that exact area, 99 times out of 100, you're right. The math is the math. The killer is the killer. But Michelle was the 100th, and the danger of the math is what criminologists sometimes call the less dead phenomenon. A cold, ugly little term. It describes a pattern where missing people who fit certain demographics, people with addiction histories, people with rocky families, women who work night shifts, people on the margins, get filed away as probable homicides rather than searched for as missing humans. The system, once it gets that label on you, stops looking for you. It only looks for your corpse. If Michelle Whitaker had been, say, a 33-year-old accountant from a quiet suburb with no family drama, detectives might have spent more time chasing a runaway theory. They might have asked harder questions about where else she could have gone, instead of where else she might be buried. but she fit the killer's victim profile too well. So she became a victim, on paper, for 6 years. The truth was that Michelle Whitaker had every right that any adult has in this country. The right, ugly and inconvenient as it is, to walk away from your own life, to stop answering the phone, to stop sending Christmas cards, to get on a bus and go somewhere where nobody is yelling at you and start over. She used that right. And she used it so successfully that she very nearly took it to her grave. The reunion between Michelle and her mother was, by all accounts, a hurricane. 6 years of grief, 6 years of mourning a child supposedly killed by one of the worst men in the state, and then suddenly the child is on the phone, alive, whole, apologetic, confused. Repairing that is the work of a lifetime. The relief is real. So is the rage. So is the heartbreak. So is the strange, hollow feeling of having grieved someone who wasn't gone. 6 years of imagined horror, of imagining her daughter's last moments at the hands of a monster. And the monster, it turns out, had nothing to do with anything. Michelle and her mother slowly, painfully started rebuilding. It is every family's worst nightmare to lose a daughter to a serial killer. But Michelle Whitaker is the 1 in a million proof that sometimes the woman in the missing persons photo isn't in the woods. Sometimes she isn't in a shallow grave. Sometimes the monster in the headlines had absolutely nothing to do with where she went. Sometimes she's on the other side of the country, watching her own neighbor recognize her on the evening news, hoping against all odds that the phone is about to ring. Picture an 18-year-old kid sitting in his high school guidance counselor's office in Cleveland, Ohio. He's a senior, he's a straight-A student, he's just scored near perfect on his ACT. He has dreams of going to Ohio State. He is the kind of kid every teacher in the building points at when they want to say, that one's going to be fine. On the desk in front of him is a college financial aid application, the FAFSA, and it has been kicking back the same error message all week. His social security number doesn't match. He's frustrated. The counselor is frustrated. She decides to dig a little deeper. 2 days later, she calls him back into her office, and what she has to tell him is going to detonate his entire life. His name is not what he thinks it is. His father is not who he thinks he is. His mother, the one he believes abandoned him, has been screaming his name into the void since 2002. And the boy sitting in front of her, the honors student with the Ohio State dreams, is not JJ. He is Julian Hernandez, and he has been a missing child on the FBI's radar since he was 5 years old. He has accidentally solved his own kidnapping by filling out a college form. Let's go back to where this started. It's August 28, 2002. Vestavia Hills, Alabama. If you've never been, picture a wealthy, leafy suburb just outside Birmingham. Big lawns, quiet streets, the kind of bedroom community where the worst crime on the police blotter most weeks is somebody letting their dog off the leash. It's late summer. The cicadas are screaming in the trees. School is about to start. Parents are buying new lunchboxes and trapper keepers. In one of those houses, there's a 5-year-old little boy named Julian Hernandez. He's about to start his first real year of preschool. He's a normal kid. He's loved. He has a mom who adores him. The setup, though, is a little complicated. Julian's parents aren't together. His mother has primary custody. His father, Bobby Hernandez, is the non-custodial parent, and things between Bobby and the mom have been tense for a while. There has been some controlling behavior. There have been some ugly words. In fact, and this is the detail that will haunt Julian's mother for the rest of her life, Bobby had told her before that if she ever truly left him, he would take the boy. He wouldn't share him. He would take him. But on this particular August morning, the agreement is simple. Bobby's going to babysit for a couple of hours, and then he's going to drop Julian off at preschool. That's it. A routine, mundane, parental task, something he has done before. He doesn't drop Julian at preschool. Julian's mother gets a call from the school. "Where's Julian?" She goes home in a panic. The house is empty. Bobby is gone. Julian is gone. And there's a note from Bobby, telling her in plain words that he has taken the boy. By the time the police get involved, Bobby has emptied his bank accounts and is hundreds of miles away. He has basically vanished off the face of the earth with a 5-year-old in tow. For Julian's mother, what follows is the kind of nightmare that does not have words. She works with the Vestavia Hills Police. She works with the FBI. She is on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, database from day one. Julian's face goes up on flyers, on posters, on websites. She follows every lead. She chases every sighting. And there are sightings. There are always sightings in cases like this. And every single one of them comes to nothing. A year goes by. Then 2. Then 5. Julian's mother is living a parent's worst possible recurring nightmare because she doesn't know if her son is dead. She doesn't know if he's alive. She doesn't know if he's been hurt. She doesn't know if he's been taken out of the country. She doesn't know if he's eating. She doesn't know if he remembers her. She does the math in her head. Julian would be 6 now. 7. He's starting elementary school somewhere. 8. He's losing his baby teeth somewhere. 11. 12. He's a teenager now, somewhere, if he's anywhere at all. 13 years of that. 13 birthdays of staring at a picture of a 5-year-old boy. 13 Christmases with an empty chair. The case slowly transitions from active to cold. The flyers fade in the sun. Bobby Hernandez and his 5-year-old son have just stopped existing. Except they haven't. Of course they haven't. Let me take you north, about 700 miles north of Vestavia Hills, to Cleveland, Ohio, because that is where Bobby Hernandez drove that summer in 2002 with a tiny boy in the back seat. And that is where he started building one of the most quietly insane long cons in modern American criminal history. Bobby changed his own name. He started using the alias Jonathan Mangina. He somehow obtained, and this is one of those details that will frustrate every law-abiding person who has ever stood in line at the DMV, he somehow obtained an Ohio driver's license under that fake name. In 2012, he got it cleanly from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles. He also got a fraudulent Social Security card. He set up a normal life. He paid rent, he held jobs, and little Julian? Bobby renamed him too. Julian became JJ. He enrolled the kid in the Cleveland public school system. He showed up to parent-teacher conferences. He did homework with his son at the kitchen table. But here's the thing. Here is the thing. Bobby did not raise Julian in a basement. He did not raise him in fear. He did not abuse him. He did not lock him in a closet. He did the opposite. He raised Julian to be exceptional. By every external metric, JJ was a model child, honor roll, honor society, friends, teachers who adored him, a near-perfect ACT score, realistic dreams of going to Ohio State University. The kid was thriving. Now, this is where it gets incredibly strange. Because if you're going to kidnap your own son and live as a fugitive, wouldn't the smart move be to keep that kid invisible? Don't let him excel. Don't let him win awards. Don't let him put his name on anything that the federal government might one day audit. But Bobby played it the other way. He raised a high-achieving, public, scholastic golden child. And he did one more thing, one cruel, calculated thing, to make sure Julian never went looking for his real past. He told Julian his mother had abandoned him. That was the story. That was the foundation of the whole 13-year illusion. Julian grew up believing that his mom, somewhere out there, simply didn't want him. That his dad had heroically taken him in and given him everything. That the silence on the other side of his childhood was a mother's choice, not a father's crime. So Julian had no reason to look. Why would he? Why would you search for someone you'd been told threw you away? Hold on a second. Let's look at this in cold daylight. Think about the logistics for a second. How does a man on the run successfully raise a kidnapped child in modern America for 13 years without anyone catching on? You need a birth certificate to enroll a kid in kindergarten. You need a social security number for pediatric appointments. You need vaccination records. You need school transcripts that track from one grade to the next. You need a tax return that claims the kid as a dependent. Every single one of those touch points is, in theory, a place where the system could go, wait a minute. How did Bobby get past all of it? Honestly? Because in 2002 and through the mid-2000s, those systems didn't really talk to each other. Different school districts didn't cross-reference national missing children's databases. The DMV in Ohio didn't ping the FBI to verify identities. Tax filings didn't trigger an alarm if the SSN was a little off. America in those years was a country where, if you were patient and disciplined and willing to commit small frauds across enough small bureaucracies, you could just exist as somebody else. Bobby was patient, Bobby was disciplined, and Bobby got away with it for a long, long time. But here's the part of this story that I love, the part that makes me feel okay about the universe. Because there is one bureaucracy in the United States that is too big, too automated, too interconnected, and too federal to fool. College financial aid. In October 2015, 18-year-old JJ, honors student, Ohio State hopeful, sits down to do what every other ambitious American senior does at that age. He starts filling out his FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. It is the gateway to every government scholarship, grant, and loan in the country, and the FAFSA is rigid, it is unforgiving, it is wired directly into the Social Security Administration. He types in his Social Security number, error. He types it in again, error. The system keeps rejecting it. The number Bobby gave him years ago, the fraudulent one, does not match the federal database. It is throwing a flag. JJ, does what any frustrated, ambitious kid would do. He goes to his school guidance counselor for help. He sits down in her office. He explains the glitch. My SSN keeps getting rejected. Can you help me figure out what's wrong? The counselor takes the number. She starts running it through the deeper administrative tools available to her. And as the searches widen, the system cross-checks against bigger databases. Eventually, one of those queries pings the NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And the moment that hit comes back, the counselor's office stops being a counselor's office. The student sitting in the chair across from her is no longer JJ, honors senior, prom prospect, Ohio State hopeful. The student sitting in the chair across from her is Julian Hernandez, reported missing from Alabama, August 28, 2002, age 5. She calls the FBI. On October 30, 2015, the Cleveland Division of the FBI receives a definitive tip from a high school guidance counselor about a Social Security anomaly. By November 2, 2015, they have confirmed it. The Cleveland honors student is the missing Alabama boy. The dad in the modest little Cleveland house is the fugitive father. The abandoned by his mother story is a lie. The mother in Alabama, who has been looking for her child for 13 years, is about to get the phone call she stopped expecting almost a decade ago. Now imagine being Julian in that moment, 18 years old. You love your dad. He raised you. He helped you with your homework. He pushed you to be your best. He's the reason you scored a near-perfect act. He's the reason you've got Ohio State within reach. And a school counselor sits you down and tells you your dad is your captor. Your name isn't real. Your real mother has been searching for you since you were 5. Your entire life is a crime scene. How does a teenager's brain even process that? How do you reorganize 18 years of memory in a single afternoon? Every Christmas, every birthday, every late-night talk about homework, every "I'm proud of you, kid," all of it in every single moment, it was being delivered by the man who stole you from the woman who actually deserved to be there. The mind cannot unfeel a childhood. The brain cannot retroactively delete love just because the source turned out to be a criminal. And that is why what happens next is the part of this story that I think is the most quietly devastating. Bobby Hernandez was arrested in Cleveland. He was extradited and charged. Felony interference with custody, records tampering, parental abduction. And when Bobby went to trial, Julian, 18 years old, now reunited with the biological mother he never knew was looking for him, took the stand for the defense. He didn't testify against his father. He testified to spare him. He looked the judge in the eye and asked for mercy. He talked about how his father raised him, how he loved him. He said, and this is a direct quote, "Even if other people can't, I forgive him for what he's done. The time I've spent with him is the only time I've ever truly felt at home and at peace." The Cuyahoga County prosecutor was not having it. He called Bobby a manipulative con man who built his son's entire life on a lie. The judge agreed. Bobby Hernandez was sentenced to 4 years in prison plus 5 years of supervised release. The court called the abduction a horrible thing to do to a mother or any parent. And Julian's biological mother, overjoyed beyond words to know her son was alive and well, also had to face the soul-crushing reality that came with it. He was a legal adult now. They could not force him to come back to Alabama. They could not undo 13 years of indoctrination. She did not get her 5-year-old back. She got an 18-year-old stranger who had spent his entire conscious life believing she had thrown him away. She had to start from scratch, building a relationship with a son who already had a complete past with another woman's version of his name. Sometimes the bad guy isn't a stranger in a van. Sometimes the bad guy is the parent at the kitchen table, smiling at his son over a bowl of cereal, helping him with his math homework, while a woman 700 miles south stares at a photograph of a 5-year-old boy and wonders if he's still alive. The case of Julian Hernandez is, in its way, a case about how modern America has so many cracks in its identity systems that you can raise an entirely fraudulent child to the brink of adulthood inside one. But it's also a case about how, eventually, those cracks do close. The federal government is slow, the bureaucracy is annoying, the FAFSA form is a nightmare. But that form, that single, mundane piece of college financial aid paperwork, is what reached across 13 years into a Cleveland honors student's senior year and delivered the truth. A mother lost a 5-year-old boy in 2002. She got back an 18-year-old man in 2015. All because somewhere in the gears of a financial aid algorithm, a number didn't match. That's the haunting thing about the digital age. The lies still work. They just don't work forever. Eventually, you have to fill out the form. Imagine searching for your sister for 44 years, 44 birthdays, 44 Christmases, 44 times you almost called her name when the phone rang, and then, one day in 2015, someone finally hands you the answer you've been waiting half a lifetime for. And that answer is a grave, with the wrong name on it, in a town you've never been to. And the woman buried inside it has been dead since 1976. This is the story of Tamara Milegrad, and it is one of the cleanest disappearing acts in modern Australian history, performed by a 15-year-old girl with no money, no plan, and no apparent reason in the world to vanish. Let's set the scene. It's September 18th, 1971. Newport, Victoria, a working-class suburb on the western edge of Melbourne. The kind of neighborhood where the houses are small, the front lawns are tidy, and everybody on the street knows whose washing is on whose line. The Milegrad family lives on Mason Street. They're Eastern European immigrants, a tightly knit, deeply traditional household where the rules are the rules, and the rules don't bend. In that house, you've got Luba, the mother. You've got Eugene, the 18-year-old big brother. You've got Nick, who's 12, and little Alex, who's 9. And then you've got Tamara, 15 years old, almost 16. And by every account, drifting. She wasn't a bad kid. She wasn't running with gangs. She wasn't on hard drugs. But she had hit that particular teenage wall, the one where the world her parents built for her stops feeling like home and starts feeling like a cage. She was pulling away, hanging out with boys her family didn't approve of, pushing back against the future her parents had carefully scripted for her in 2 languages. You know the kind of friction. Most of us lived through some version of it. The difference is, most of us came home for dinner. That Saturday morning, Tamara casually walked into the kitchen and told her mom she was going out for the day. Not to a friend's house, not to a party. She was going to the Royal Melbourne Show. If you don't know what that is, picture an enormous state fair. Show bags, livestock pavilions, sticky toffee apples, screaming kids on rickety rides, sunburn, dust, the smell of fried onions, tens of thousands of people packed shoulder to shoulder, the kind of crowd a teenage girl can disappear into without anyone noticing. And that is exactly what she did. She walked out the front door of the house on Mason Street, and she never walked back in. Now, this is where most missing kid stories follow a script. Parents panic, cops are called, searches happen, and in 1971, before mobile phones, before CCTV on every corner, before digital records, there's only so much to do. Knock on doors, ask her friends, check the hospitals, check the morgue, pray. The Milograds did all of it. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months turned into the kind of years that don't move in a straight line. They just hang there, suspended, while the rest of the world keeps moving forward without you. Eugene grew up, Nick grew up, Alex grew up, Luba aged. Tamara just stayed 15. Forever 15, in every photograph on the mantelpiece. Forever about to come home. The family later called it a living nightmare without end. And that's not a writer's flourish. That's the exact language they used, because if a body had turned up, they could have buried it. If a witness had come forward saying she'd been taken, they could have hated someone. They could have grieved. Instead, they got nothing. No clues, no footprints, nothing. Just the silence of a girl who walked into a fairground and walked off the edge of the world. But here's what they didn't know. And here's where the story gets quietly, unbelievably strange. Tamara wasn't dead. She wasn't being held in a basement. She wasn't being trafficked. She had somehow, and we'll come back to that word somehow, made it out of Melbourne, slipped away from the city, drifted into rural Victoria. And she had done something that, frankly, a 15-year-old girl in 1971 should not have been able to do. She had reinvented herself. She picked a new name, Pauline Tammy Russell. She picked a new birth year, bumping herself up by 3 years so that on paper she was 18, legally an adult, free to sign leases and get jobs and build a life. And she just became Pauline. Not in some sketchy underworld kind of way, not hiding in shadows, out in the open, walking around, working, making friends, joining a community. By 1975, Pauline was in a relationship. By 1976, she had 2 children. The youngest was a baby girl she named Corinna. And then, in 1976, Pauline Tammy Russell was killed in a car accident. Her daughter Corinna was 8 months old. Nobody in that small country town knew that the woman they were burying wasn't really Pauline. They didn't know her real birthday was March 6th. They didn't know her father's name was Alexander. They didn't know she had a mother named Luba and a brother named Nick waiting for her, 4 hours and a whole lifetime away in Newport. She was buried under a fake name, in a town that didn't know her real one, while her family kept lighting candles for a teenager who, by then, had already been in the ground for years. Hold on a second, let's look at that again. Because there is something genuinely wrong with how easy this was. You're 15 years old. You have no driver's license. You have no credit card. Nobody has credit cards yet. You have no money to speak of. You walk out of your house with whatever fits in a teenage girl's handbag. You spend a day at a fairground. And from there, what? Where do you sleep that first night? Where do you get the second name? Who teaches you how to lie about your age in a way that doesn't immediately fall apart the first time someone asks? Think about this for a second. If a 15-year-old runs away in 1971, you'd expect a phone call within a week. You'd expect her to turn up at a friend's house, or hitchhike home when the money ran out, or get caught shoplifting at a country servo and have a copper in a small town go, "Hang on, aren't you that missing girl from Melbourne?" That's how this kind of story is supposed to go, but not Tamara. Tamara just kept walking. She somehow found people who didn't ask the hard questions. She somehow knew intuitively that if you bump your birth year up 3 years and you pick a plausible-sounding name with the same nickname you've always had, Tammy, your old self gets quietly erased. No biometric databases, no facial recognition, no social security numbers being cross-referenced by guidance counselors and FAFSA forms. Just paperwork and trust in the wide-open spaces of rural Australia in the 70s. And here's the detail that stays with me. The detail that turns this from a runaway story into something almost unbearable. She did keep pieces of her old self, buried like little fossils inside the new identity. She kept her real birthday, March 6th, the same as Tamara's. She kept a version of her real name as her middle name, Tammy. She told her new partner accurately that she was of Russian heritage. She told her daughter accurately that her own father's name had been Alexander. She erased everything that could be searched, and she kept everything that couldn't. Why? If you were really trying to disappear, fully disappear, wouldn't you change everything? Pick a brand new birthday. Pick a brand new heritage. Bury your father's name forever. Why leave these little breadcrumbs trailing behind you in the new life if not, and this is the part that hurts, because some part of you still wanted to be found? But she wasn't found. Not in time. Not within 5 years when she might have been brought home. The crash in 1976 ended that possibility forever. And so the Milograd family spent the next 4 decades chasing a ghost who by then was just a quiet grave under a wrong name in country Victoria. Fast forward to 2015. Corinna Russell, that baby girl who was 8 months old when her mother was killed, is in her 30s, and she has spent her entire adult life chasing scraps. She knows almost nothing about the woman who gave birth to her. She has a few inherited facts: Russian heritage, a birthday of March 6th, a father somewhere out there named Alexander. Corinna is, in her own quiet way, looking for the same woman the Milograds are looking for, but from the opposite end of the timeline. The Milograds are searching forward in time for a living girl. Corinna is searching backward in time for a dead mother. They are two families orbiting the exact same person, and neither knows the other exists. In March 2015, Corinna is browsing the Australian Federal Police's National Missing Persons website, and she clicks on a profile, a girl named Tamara Milograd, vanished in 1971. Russian heritage. Birthday March 6th. Father's name? Alexander. And the face on the screen, Corinna stares at it, looks almost exactly like her own. She goes to the police. Detectives extract DNA from Corinna and from Tamara's surviving brother Nick. They use a familial matching technique that had been refined for identifying victims of the Black Saturday bushfires. Within days, the lab confirms what Corinna already suspected in her bones. Pauline Russell and Tamara Milograd were the same woman. Now, here's the part of the story that I cannot shake. The DNA solved where she went. The DNA solved what happened to her. The DNA gave the Milograd family an answer after 44 years of nothing. But the DNA could not answer the only question that actually matters. Why? What was so unbearable about being 15 in that house on Mason Street that the only solution was to invent a new human being and live as her until she died? It wasn't abuse, as far as anyone has ever said. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't a boyfriend she was eloping with. The partner came years later. It was, as far as the official record can tell, just the suffocating gravity of a strict household and a kid who didn't want to live inside it. That's not a runaway story. That's not even a tragedy. That's something quieter and stranger. That's a teenager who, on an ordinary Saturday morning, made an impossibly adult decision and never made it back from it. Luba Milograd was 90 years old when she finally learned that her daughter had been dead since 1976. 4 decades of hope dismantled in a single phone call. But there was one small, strange grace. Because when the Milograds opened the door to grief, they also opened the door to Corinna, a granddaughter they had never known existed, and her children, and her children's children, a whole secret branch of the family tree, all descended from a girl who walked into a Melbourne fairground in 1971 and never walked out. That's the haunting part of stories like this one. Sometimes solving a missing persons case doesn't close the book. Sometimes it just opens a brand new one. And the question at the center of it, why did she go, is one nobody alive can answer anymore. Because the only person who ever knew is buried in country Victoria, under the wrong name. Picture this. It's January 17th, 1985, Raymond, New Hampshire, a town so quiet you can hear the snow falling, the kind of place where the biggest news of the week is usually who won the bake sale down at the church. The streets are empty, the pine trees are bent under the weight of ice, and somewhere in this Norman Rockwell painting of a town, a 24-year-old bookkeeper named Denise Bolzer is about to pull off the most terrifying disappearing act in the state's history. Except she's not the one in danger. Now, before we get to the note, before we get to the footprints in the snow, before we get to the moment a woman walks into thin air for 17 years, we need to understand who Denise was. Because that's the part that doesn't add up. Denise Bolser was 24 years old. Recently married, technically still sharing a home with her husband, even though things between them had gone cold. She worked as a bookkeeper at a small company in Manchester, New Hampshire, just a short drive down the road. And she was close, really close, with her parents, Maurice and Claire. The kind of daughter who calls her mom every couple of days. The kind of woman whose biggest secret should have been which casserole she was bringing to Thanksgiving. To anyone looking in from the outside, Denise had a perfectly ordinary life. Boring, even, safe. That's what makes what happens next so impossible. So let's set the scene. January 17th, 1985. Denise's husband comes home from work. The house is dark, empty, cold in that specific way a house feels when no one has been moving around inside it for hours. But here's the thing. It's not just that she's not there. Something is off. On a surface in the house, he finds a note. Typed, not handwritten. Typed like someone took the time to sit down at a typewriter and carefully compose this thing. And the message is just 4 words long. We've got your wife. That's it. No demands, no ransom amount, no phone number for negotiations. Just a flat, almost cinematic threat that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a B-movie. He calls the police. They show up. They sweep the property. And outside, in the fresh New Hampshire snow, they find a single set of footprints leading away from the house. Just one set. Walking, not running, not dragged, walking. Then the prints just stop. They melt away into the storm. No struggle, no clues, nothing. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because a few days later, investigators locate Denise's husband's pickup truck, abandoned, and it's not abandoned in some ditch off Route 101. No, it's parked at Logan International Airport in Boston, Massachusetts, almost an hour and a half away from Raymond. And when they open that truck door and look at the front seat, they find something that should have unraveled the entire kidnapping theory right there on the spot. Laid out neatly, almost reverently. There it all was. Denise's social security card, her birth certificate, her local charge cards, all her vital paperwork, the keys to her old life, arranged on the bench seat of an abandoned truck at an international airport. Hold on a second. Let's look at that again. If you're a kidnapper, if you really did snatch a woman out of her home in the middle of a New Hampshire winter, what on earth are you doing with her social security card? Are you pulling over at the airport to neatly fan it out on the passenger seat? Is that step number 4 in the kidnapping handbook? It's absurd. It's the kind of detail that, on its own, should have made every cop on the case raise an eyebrow. But in 1985, nobody could quite see the picture yet. They were looking for a body. The investigation went into overdrive. Helicopters, search dogs, door-to-door interviews, Raymond Police, the state police, eventually the FBI. Everyone was looking for Denise Bolser. The leading theory was that she'd been kidnapped, probably murdered, her body dumped somewhere in the vast, cold pine forests of New England. Her parents, Maurice and Claire, were destroyed. Just absolutely shattered. Imagine that phone call. Your daughter, your sweet bookkeeper daughter, the one who calls every couple of days, is gone. And the only thing the kidnappers left behind is a typed note that reads like a movie tagline. Now, here's where the story takes its first big turn. Because about a year later, April 1986, the focus of the case suddenly shifts, hard. A Hillsborough County grand jury issues an indictment, and the person they're charging, it's not a kidnapper, it's not some shadowy figure, it's Denise Bolser herself. For the alleged theft of $11,998.86 from her employer. Suddenly, the whole abducted bookkeeper narrative starts to wobble. Because now you have a missing woman who is also technically a wanted fugitive. The police are confused, the family is confused. Her husband, who has by now been cleared of any involvement, eventually divorces her in absentia. And for 17 long years, nothing. Her parents wait. They put up flyers, they light candles. They go through every emotion you can imagine. Was she dead? Was she alive somewhere, suffering? Was she happy? Was she even capable of being happy? 17 birthdays, 17 Christmases, 17 anniversaries of the worst day of their lives, and then, May 13th, 2002, Panama City, Florida. About as far from a New Hampshire winter as you can get without leaving the country. The sun is coming up, the air smells like salt and palm trees, and in a quiet little house, a 42-year-old woman shuffles to her front door, still half asleep, probably expecting a delivery driver. What she finds instead is a small army. Officers from the Raymond, New Hampshire Police Department, local Florida cops, FBI special agents, all standing on her doorstep before she's even had her coffee. The woman's name, according to her driver's license, was Denise James. She was a wife. A bookkeeper, actually. Yes, the same career. For a local business, she had a quiet, simple, sun-drenched Florida life. But the moment she saw those badges, the moment she saw those uniforms from 1,000 miles away in New Hampshire, she just crumbled. She broke down in tears right there on her own welcome mat, and she admitted, finally, after 17 years, that her real name was Denise Bolser. Okay, so now we hit the part of this story where you have to stop and ask the obvious question. Why? Why would a 24-year-old woman with loving parents, a husband, and a steady job fake her own kidnapping? Walk into a snowstorm? Lay out her identification at an airport like she was performing a ritual? Disappear for 17 years? Let's look at the facts. Go back to those footprints, one set. Leading away from the house, walking under their own power. Go back to that truck at the airport, with every piece of Denise's identifying paperwork stacked on the front seat, almost lovingly. That is not the work of a kidnapper. That isn't even the work of someone in a panic. That is the work of someone who is methodically, deliberately shedding their identity, saying goodbye to it, leaving it behind on a vinyl bench seat so she could walk into the terminal and become someone else. And the note. We've got your wife. 4 words, typed, no demands, no follow-up call, nothing. Because there were no kidnappers to make those demands. The note wasn't from criminals. It was for the police. It was a magic trick, a misdirection, a cinematic flourish that bought her enough time to slip out of New England forever. So what was she actually running from? Here's the part that, frankly, hits like a punch in the chest. According to Denise, her boss, the head of the small company where she kept the books, was running an embezzlement scheme. And he didn't want to do it alone. He needed his bookkeeper to cook the books, to bury the numbers, to make the missing money invisible on paper. Denise says he forced her into it. And when the company's audit started closing in, when the math wouldn't lie anymore, she said he turned to her and told her in plain English, "You're gonna be dead in 2 days." He was going to kill her. Or so she believed. And not just her. The implication, she said, was that her family was on the line too. Her parents, her husband, the people she loved most in the world. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, fine, but why didn't she just go to the cops? But put yourself in her shoes for a second. You're 24. You're not a hardened criminal. You're a bookkeeper from a small town in New Hampshire. Your boss, a powerful businessman with money and connections, has just told you he will murder your family. And, oh, by the way, you've already signed your name to his fraudulent ledgers. You are already on paper as a thief. If you walk into the police station, who do they arrest first? You, the 24-year-old bookkeeper whose name is on every cooked spreadsheet, or the businessman with a clean record. In 1985, no whistleblower protections, no digital paper trail, no cell phones, no nothing. Who do you think they believe? She felt cornered, trapped in a corner with no exits. And in her mind, the only way to protect the people she loved was to make the world believe she was gone. Erase the bookkeeper, save the husband, save the parents, and let everyone mourn a ghost. So she walked into the snow. When Denise finally surfaced and told her story in 2002, her old boss was already dead. The man who allegedly threatened her life never faced a courtroom, never had to explain himself, never had to look Maurice and Claire Desrousseau in the eye and tell them what he made their daughter do. The reunion with her parents was, by all accounts, a hurricane of emotions. Relief, obviously, their daughter was alive, but also confusion. anger, grief for the 17 lost years, grief for the grandchildren they could have known, grief for the birthdays and Christmases that had become little funerals in their hearts. Her first marriage was gone. Her old life was gone. Her 20s, gone. A huge chunk of her 30s, gone under a fake name in Florida sunshine. And here's the haunting part. The part you don't shake when you turn the lights off and try to sleep. We tell ourselves stories about who the monsters are. They live in the woods. They hide in the basements. They drive vans with no windows. They lurk in the shadows of bad neighborhoods. But sometimes, and this is the truth nobody really wants to hear, sometimes the monsters wear a tie. Sometimes they sit behind a desk in a corner office. Sometimes they sign your paycheck. And sometimes the only way to escape them isn't to call the police or hire a lawyer or fight back. Sometimes the only way out is to walk into a snowstorm and not come back for 17 years. Picture a man stepping out of his Manhattan brownstone on a humid August morning in 1902. He's wearing a fine suit. He has a leather doctor's bag in his hand. He kisses his wife goodbye, hands her a hastily scribbled letter, tells her he'll be back in a few days, and walks out the door. He is one of the most respected eye surgeons in the city. He is wealthy. He is loved. He has a calendar full of high society patients. He will not see that wife again for the rest of her life. And the next time anyone who knows him lays eyes on him, he will be standing in a one-stoplight prairie town in North Dakota, 8 years later, wearing a different name and claiming he doesn't remember a single thing about New York. This is the story of Dr. William Horatio Bates, and it might be the strangest disappearance in American medical history. Let's set the scene. It is the summer of 1902. New York City is at the peak of its Gilded Age strangeness. Electric streetlights buzz on the avenues. Horse-drawn carriages still clatter past the first automobiles. The Brooklyn Bridge is barely 20 years old. Skyscrapers are starting to claw at the sky. It's loud, it smells like horse and coal smoke, and it is the absolute center of the American universe. And right in the middle of that bustle is Dr. Bates. Born in 1860, he is now 42 years old and operating at the absolute peak of his profession. He has a thriving private ophthalmology practice. He is an instructor at the prestigious New York Postgraduate Medical School. He lives in comfort with his devoted wife, Ada Seaman Bates. He moves in the kind of circles where you get invited to galas, and your name is in the social columns of the New York Times. He is, to anyone watching from the outside, a man who has won at the game of life. This is not a guy with reasons to disappear. He doesn't have gambling debts. He doesn't have a scandal nipping at his heels. His career is golden. His marriage looks solid. That is precisely what makes what happens on August 30th, 1902, so completely impossible to explain. That morning, Dr. Bates is rushed, agitated, but in a focused, purposeful way. He scribbles a note to Aida. The note explains that he's been called out of town on urgent medical business with an old colleague, a man he calls Dr. Forsch, to perform a series of high-stakes brain operations. He calls it a financial bonanza. He says he'll be back. Then he walks out the door. He doesn't come back. A day goes by. Ida doesn't worry. He said he'd be out of town. A week goes by. Now she's worried. 2 weeks. 3. She tries to track down this Dr. Forchi. As far as anyone can tell, the man may not even exist. The bonanza surgery? No record of it. No hospital scheduled it. No colleague has heard of it. This is when Ada panics. And Ida, to her enormous credit, does not just sit around weeping. She acts. She is from a well-connected family. She mobilizes everything she can. She gets word out through the Freemasons, a brotherhood her husband belonged to, and which at the turn of the century had genuine global reach. She distributes his photograph through Masonic lodges across America and across Europe. She offers rewards. She gets newspapers involved. This is a society wife in 1902 essentially launching her own private Interpol. And here's where I want you to stop with me for 1 second, because there is a detail in this case that nobody talks about enough. Dr. William Horatio Bates had a fortune, a serious one, sitting right there in his New York bank accounts. And it was, every penny of it, completely untouched. Now, think about this. He had told Aida he was leaving town for a financial bonanza, so he claimed money was the reason. But the money he already owned, the money sitting in his own account, the money he had unrestricted access to, he never withdrew it. He didn't drain his savings. He didn't even take a chunk for travel expenses. He left it. If you're running away to start a new life, you take your money with you. If you're being kidnapped, the kidnappers usually demand the money. If you're going on a business trip, you withdraw expenses. So what is a wealthy doctor doing walking into the void without a dime of his own fortune? That's the first crack in the official story. Hold on to it. It matters later. Roughly 6 weeks after he vanishes, the Masonic network pays off. A tip comes in from London, England. A man matching Dr. Bates's description has been spotted working, and I am not exaggerating this, as a lowly medical assistant at Charing Cross Hospital. Ada boards a steamship and crosses the Atlantic. When she arrives at the hospital, she finds her husband alive. But he is barely recognizable. He is emaciated, haggard. His eyes are sunken. He looks like a man who has been on the streets. When she walks up to him and says his name, he stares at her like she is a stranger. He tells her calmly, "I don't know why you bother, madam. We are strangers." He has no memory of being Dr. William Horatio Bates, no memory of New York, no memory of Ada, no memory of his medical school, his patients, his Masonic brothers, his clients, his city, his life. Now, hold on a second. Let's look at that again. A man suffers a complete neurological collapse so severe that he forgets his entire identity. Fine, let's pretend that's possible. The medical literature does describe a thing called a dissociative fugue. Extremely rare, but it does happen. People wander away from their lives, forget who they are, sometimes build small new ones. But here's the part that doesn't add up. Doesn't even come close to adding up. This man, supposedly with no memory of who he is, somehow purchased a ticket for a transatlantic steamship. He somehow packed a bag. He somehow boarded an ocean liner in 1902, which required a passenger manifest with a name on it. He somehow survived a journey of weeks across the open Atlantic without anyone noticing he had completely lost his mind. He arrived in London, somehow found his way to a major hospital, and somehow convinced them to hire him as a medical assistant, which means he could still demonstrate at a clinical level that he knew anatomy, ophthalmology, surgical technique. Does amnesia leave that intact? Does a broken brain successfully cross an ocean? I want you to really sit with this, because the medical community at the time scratched their heads and called it a strange form of aphasia and shrugged. But we are talking about a man who, while supposedly not knowing his own name, kept every single bit of his specialized medical training intact. He forgot his wife, but remembered how to perform eye exams. He forgot New York, but remembered the structure of the human retina. That is extraordinarily selective amnesia. It gets worse. Ida, being a good wife, refuses to embarrass him at the hospital. She doesn't drag him out. Instead, she gently persuades him to come stay with her at the Savoy Hotel, one of the most luxurious places in London. She figures, give him a few days of comfort, familiar voice, familiar face. His memory will come back. He'll snap out of it. 2 days into their stay at the Savoy, 2 days, he walks out of the hotel lobby, and he is gone again. He has now vanished twice. The first time you can almost frame as a tragic medical accident. But the second time? He has just been reunited with his frantic wife, who has crossed an ocean to save him. He's in a 5-star hotel. He's safe. He's clothed. He's fed. And he walks out the front door and disappears. Ida is destroyed. She spends the next several years crisscrossing Europe and the east coast of America looking for him. She drains herself emotionally, physically, financially. And in 1907, she dies, reportedly clutching a portrait of her missing husband. She never knew what happened to him. She went to her grave without an answer. Now, here's where this story stops being sad and starts being infuriating. 3 years after Ada dies, 8 years after the original disappearance, a New York doctor by the name of J.E. Kelly is traveling through the American Midwest. He happens to be passing through a frontier town called Grand Forks, North Dakota. Population around 12,000, wheat fields, wide skies, wooden sidewalks, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and the nearest big city is hundreds of miles away. Dr. Kelly is walking down the street, and he looks up, and he sees a face he knows. Standing in front of a small medical clinic, running it apparently, is William Horatio Bates, the same Bates, the same eye doctor, the man Kelly worked with in New York, the man whose face has been on Masonic flyers for years, the man whose wife died grieving him. He is alive, he is healthy, he looks great. He is operating a thriving ophthalmology practice in the middle of the American prairie. Kelly walks up, confronts him, and Bates, still, looks at him and claims he has no idea who he is. No memory of New York, no memory of Ada, no memory of his old life. Just a doctor named, well, the records get fuzzy here. But he's been living under another name in Grand Forks, treating local patients, billing them, taking referrals, being a respected member of the community. Eventually, Kelly convinces him to come back to New York with him, and miraculously, on returning to the city, his memory starts to come back. How convenient. Okay, time to look at this in cold daylight. Theory 1, genuine dissociative fugue, a rare neurological condition, maybe a head injury we don't know about, maybe an emotional break. It does happen. It would explain why he wandered, why he forgot, why he kept rebuilding himself in new cities. Theory 2, and I think you can feel this one, is that Dr. William Horatio Bates was a man drowning in his own life. He had a marriage he no longer wanted, a high society reputation he was suffocating under, a career path he hadn't chosen so much as inherited, and he was brilliant enough to realize that there is one and only one socially acceptable way for a man of his stature to walk away from all of it without facing public ruin. You can't divorce in 1902 high society without scandal. You can't quit medicine without losing everything. You can't just leave your wife. But what you can do is have a tragic medical event, a strange aphasia, a noble, sympathetic, unexplainable thing that the doctors of the era are too primitive to diagnose. And once you've got that label, you can drift out of one life and into another, and another, and another, and nobody can blame you. He kept the parts of himself he liked, the medical knowledge, the clinical skill, the income. He shed the parts he didn't, the wife, the social calendar, the city, the expectations. Selective amnesia or selective editing? Here's the kicker, the part that makes me think Theory 2 might be the right one. When Bates eventually returned to New York, he didn't become a normal eye doctor again. Oh no, he turned aggressively against mainstream medicine. He abandoned the orthodoxy he had once taught at the postgraduate medical school. He invented a controversial, historically debunked practice called the Bates method, which dangerously encouraged patients to look directly at the sun, an act modern medicine strictly warns against. It involved a thing called palming, where you cover your eyes with your hands. He claimed it could cure poor eyesight without glasses. He published a book in 1920, Perfect Sight Without Glasses, that sold like crazy. He became more famous, not less. He remarried. He thrived. The Federal Trade Commission eventually came after him in 1929 for false claims. He died in 1931, an alternative medicine guru, a household name, an icon, and a complete and utter contradiction of the broken, amnesiac man who had supposedly stumbled across the Atlantic in 1902. So which is the real Dr. Bates? The one whose brain mysteriously short-circuited and stranded him in London? Or the one who figured out before anyone else that the ultimate prescription wasn't for your eyes, it was for your entire life? We are never going to know for sure, because the only man who could tell us the truth took the answer with him to the grave, and he made damn sure nobody could follow him there. Imagine the police pulling heavy machinery into your backyard. The neighbors are watching from behind their curtains. The whole street smells like upturned earth. Officers are sifting through the dirt where your kids used to play, looking for a body. Her body. Your wife's. And it's not there. It's never going to be there. Because she's not in the ground at all. She's 1,500 miles north, in a place so remote most people couldn't find it on a map, and she's raising 4 other children who don't even know you exist. This is the story of Lucy Ann Johnson. And it's one of the strangest, most heartbreaking missing persons cases in Canadian history because it doesn't end with a grave. It ends with a newspaper ad. Let's go back to where it starts. It's September 1961. Surrey, British Columbia. Specifically the Whalley neighborhood, a quiet, blue-collar suburban patch tucked just south of Vancouver. The kind of street where the lawns are tidy, the cars are American, and the houses all have those low-sloping roofs and clapboard siding that scream early 60s Canada. It's the kind of neighborhood where a kid can ride a bike to the corner store, and nobody locks the front door during the day. Inside one of those houses lives the Johnson family. Lucy Ann Johnson is 25 years old. She was born Lucy Ann Carvel, way up in Skagway, Alaska, about as far from anywhere as you can get without falling into the ocean. She married Marvin Johnson 7 years earlier, and together they have 2 small kids, Linda, who's 7, and her little brother Daniel. On paper, they're a picture-perfect early 60s household. Dad's the breadwinner, mom's at home, 2 kids, white picket fence energy. That's the outside. That's what the neighbors see. Inside that house, inside that marriage, something is very wrong, and we will get to that. But you have to understand the appearance first, because the appearance is what made everything that followed so impossible to explain. On an unremarkable September afternoon, a neighbor sees Lucy out on the 10,300 block of 145 A Street. Just a normal sighting, a quick wave, a glance, the kind of thing you barely remember at the time. That neighbor turns out to be the last person on the planet to publicly admit they saw Lucy Ann Johnson alive. After that, she's gone. Now, here's where most disappearance stories sprint forward. Police get called, searches start. Helicopters, dogs, flyers stapled to telephone poles, news crews knocking on the door. That's the script. That's what's supposed to happen. It's not what happens. What happens is nothing. Marvin Johnson, the husband, doesn't call the police. Not that day, not that week, not that month, not that year. Let me say that again because I want it to really land. His wife disappears and he doesn't report it to the cops. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become, and I am not making this up, 4 entire years. Marvin keeps living in the house. He keeps raising the kids. Linda grows from 7 to 11. Daniel grows up alongside her. Holidays come and go. School photos get taken. And the mother in those school photos just isn't there. And nobody, officially, is looking for her. It is not until May 14th, 1965, nearly 4 full years later, that Marvin Johnson finally walks into a police station and reports his wife missing. Now, this is where it gets strange. Because the moment a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer reads that report, the cogs in his head start spinning in a very particular direction. And honestly, can you blame him? Think about this for a second. If your wife disappears, you don't wait 4 years. You don't wait 4 days. You call the cops that night. You call her mother. You call her sister. You call the hospitals. You're in your car driving every street within 20 miles of your house. You don't shrug and keep making dinner for 4 years. So what is Marvin Johnson actually telling the police? In their eyes, he's telling them, I killed my wife. Without saying the words, he's basically delivering a confession via behavior. Because that level of silence isn't innocence. That level of silence is a man hiding a body. So the RCMP pivots immediately. This is no longer a missing persons case. This is a domestic homicide investigation, and Marvin is the prime, the only suspect. They interrogate him. They question him for hours. They lean on him hard. And then they bring in the heavy machinery. They show up at the Johnson family home with diggers, and right there in front of the neighbors who used to wave at Lucy on the street, they tear up the backyard. They excavate the property. They are looking for a corpse. They don't find one. No bones, no fragments, no buried clothing, no signs of disturbed soil, nothing. And here's the maddening part. Forensically, in 1965, that doesn't clear Marvin. He could have buried her somewhere else. He could have dumped her in a river. He could have driven her into the wilderness and let nature do the work. The RCMP keeps him on the books as their suspect for the rest of his natural life. They run her family's DNA against unidentified remains for decades. Nothing ever matches. Marvin Johnson dies of natural causes sometime in the 1990s. He never gets arrested, he never gets charged. He goes to his grave with whatever he knew, whatever he thought he knew, locked inside his head. And then for another 20 years, the file gathers dust. Fast forward to June 2013. The Surrey RCMP has a quiet little program where they highlight one cold case a month, a missing of the month. It's a PR move, mostly, a way of reminding the public that these old files haven't been forgotten. They dust off Lucy Ann Johnson's 1961 photograph, a young woman with fair skin, light hair, freckles. The image goes out into the wild on social media, on the local news, in a few Canadian newspapers. It reaches the eyes of one specific person it was always meant to reach, Lucy's daughter, Linda, now in her late 50s. Still living with the open wound of a mother who vanished when she was 7 years old, and a father everyone assumed had murdered her. Linda decides she is done waiting for the police to crack this. She's going to find her mother herself, dead or alive. She starts digging into the family's history, genealogy, old documents. She pulls thread after thread, and eventually she finds something interesting. Her mother's parents, Margaret and Andrew Carvel, had deep ties to the Yukon Territory, the far, far north of Canada. The kind of place where you can drive for hours and not pass another car. Where the towns are small, the winters are dark, and a person can genuinely disappear from the rest of civilization if they want to. So, in July 2013, Linda takes a 50-year-old photograph of her mother and places it as an ad in a local newspaper called the Yukon News. The ad essentially asks, "Has anyone seen this woman?" She doesn't wait long. A woman up in Whitehorse, the Yukon capital, sees the ad. Her name is Rhonda. And when she looks at that 50-year-old photo, the young face, the freckles, the fair skin, she does a double take. Because that face is sitting at her own dinner table. That face is her mother. Rhonda picks up the phone. She contacts the RCMP. And in July 2013, after 52 years in the wind, Lucy Ann Johnson is found alive and well. She is 77 years old. Okay, stop, let's look at this. For half a century, the working theory of this case was domestic homicide. Marvin killed her. He hid the body. He waited 4 years to make the report just cynically enough to mess with the timeline of evidence, right? That was the assumption. But if he killed her, where was the body? The RCMP turned that backyard inside out. They didn't find a hair, not a tooth, not a button from her coat, nothing. And in 1961, the average husband who kills his wife is not a forensic genius. He's not dissolving anyone in lye. He's not driving the body 200 miles in the trunk of his car. He's panicking and digging a hole. There was no hole, because there was no body. So if Lucy wasn't murdered, why was Marvin acting exactly like a man who had murdered her? Here's where the truth lands. And it's almost worse, in a way, than the murder theory. Marvin's 4-year silence wasn't an attempt to outsmart the cops. It was something far more pathetic. He wasn't hiding a corpse. He was hiding his ego. Lucy hadn't been killed. Lucy had left. And Marvin, this proud working-class man in early 60s Canada, couldn't bring himself to walk into a police station and say the words out loud, "My wife walked out on me." So he just didn't. He let the neighbors assume. He let the years pile up. He raised the kids in a fog of unspoken shame. He'd rather the world think he was a possible murderer than know he was an abandoned husband. And the other assumption, the one that's even harder to shake, is that mothers don't leave their kids. Right? We hear that one all the time. A woman vanishing without her children practically has to be foul play because mothers don't just walk away. Except, and this is the part that breaks your heart, Lucy says she didn't want to. When investigators finally sat down with her, and Linda finally sat down with her, Lucy told them her side. She said Marvin had been physically abusive, chronically unfaithful. The house everyone saw from the street was on the inside, a small, suffocating war zone. And Lucy had tried to leave him. She had tried to take the kids with her. Linda and Daniel were going to come along. But she said Marvin blocked her, physically, at the door. And he said 5 words to her that she carried with her for the next 52 years. "You're not taking the kids." So Lucy made the only choice she felt she had left. In a country, in a decade, with virtually no shelters for battered women, no protective orders, no real legal infrastructure for a woman in her situation, she ran, alone, north, as far north as she could go. She made it to the Yukon. She started over. She met another man. She married him. And then, slowly, almost defiantly, she built the family she had wanted in the first place. 4 more children, a whole second life, a whole second version of Lucy Ann that she got to keep, while her first life and her first 2 kids sat back in Surrey believing she was dead in a ditch somewhere. In September 2013, Linda flew up to Whitehorse to meet her mother for the first time in 52 years. And what she described afterward was almost out of body. She said looking at her 77-year-old mother was like looking into a mirror that had been waiting half a century for her to walk up to it. Same fair skin, same freckles, same exact face structure. A biological ghost that Linda had spent her entire adult life believing was buried in her own childhood backyard. And there she was, alive, frail, real, sitting across from her. But Linda had to deliver news too, because Lucy didn't know, couldn't have known, that her firstborn son, Daniel, the little boy she'd been forced to leave behind, had died years before. The mother got her daughter back. The daughter had to tell the mother that her son was already gone. And here's the thing. Linda could have hated her, could have spent the rest of her days demanding to know how a mother chooses her own survival over her kids, could have litigated every word of Lucy's story. Instead, she did something most of us probably couldn't do. She forgave her. She packed up her life in Surrey and she moved to Whitehorse permanently to be near the mother she had mourned for half a century and to build a relationship with the 4 half-siblings she never knew existed. That's how this story ends. Not with a courtroom, not with a conviction, not with a body. It ends with a woman digging through a newspaper for the ghost of her mother and finding her, alive, in a town with 1 stoplight, raising another family she was never supposed to have. The RCMP tore up a backyard for a corpse that wasn't there. Because sometimes the perfect murder isn't a murder at all. Sometimes it's just a woman with nothing left to lose, walking out the front door and walking until the snow gets so deep that nobody, not even her own husband, can follow.